Hello, I'm Sinta Ebersohn of Get Up and Grow. And as you know, it's an online community where we consciously cultivate resilience in all aspects of life, be it physical, emotional, spiritual, social, you name it. We talk about all the things. And with me here today is Nik Kiyoko. She's a transformative coach. We're going to talk about the amazing work that she does and how her experience of divorce led her to do this. Nik, thank you so much for being here and welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here.
Please tell us, what is a transformative coach? What is it that you do?
Yes, a transformative coach is a person that takes you from one point to another on a journey. So they're there to guide and help you and inspire you to transform your life in whatever area you need transforming in. So for me, I work a lot within an inner energy, and my job is to take people that are very low or are on energy, that they are experiencing something in their life that is just completely draining them and making them feel very tired and very unable to cope with their practical things during their day. And I take them on a journey to increase their energy over a period of time and create a lifestyle that actually enhances that energy. So regardless of where you go with your challenges in life, you have a tool that you can continue to use on a daily basis that enables you to keep those energy levels high. So we know that when we feel low, when we have situations in our life, whatever has caused them, the burden of the weight of that responsibility just makes us feel like we're carrying so much weight around. And when we go into periods of time where things are going great for us in our life, and those burdens are shifting, then we feel like we're walking on clouds and that we are much happier and much more in control of the things we want to do. And that is my job. It takes you from that low place into a much happier and much more energized space.
It sounds fascinating. You mentioned that it's a lifestyle, so it's not a quick fix. It's a practice that we're going to learn from you to do on a daily basis, it seems.
Yes, it is a quick fix in the sense that it does help you within a very short period of time start to feel those energy levels rise. So basically, I like to say it's a 6-week journey from feeling very, very tired and despondent and fed up to actually feeling much more confident. And I use the term 6 weeks because really at that stage, you're feeling quite good again. The transition is happening from the first moment that you sort of like start to go through the system. But I want to say that it's a lifestyle because we need to keep topping up this energy. It isn't a full bucket that stays with us forever. We have challenges every day. We have situations in our life that come and go. And if we continue to use a little bit of time every day to top up our bucket of energy, we're always going to be on a level that is much more easy to live life, much more fulfilling and much more confident and happy lifestyle.
Yeah, that makes sense. We can't give from an empty cup or an empty bucket, can we?
No.
So Nik, tell us, how did you get into this kind of work?
Well, basically, like most coaches, I reached a rock bottom stage. And I'll talk to you a little bit about that later. But from that rock bottom, I just knew that I wasn't feeling good. I was sleeping a lot. And I really wasn't coping in my life in general. I'd got quite a good job, and I wasn't coping in my job neither. And my whole world was crashing down. And I just started to look for my own self-preservation and my own help. So it wasn't that I changed careers I just sort of like had this flash in the pan that I was suddenly going to be a transformational coach. No, what happened was I needed answers. I'm a scientist by trade. I took physics, chemistry, and biology, and that curiosity of why do I feel like this and why can't I do anything about it just took over. And so I sought help, and I was very fortunate to find good help in complementary, which at my time was called alternative medicines. Very frowned upon by your mainstream medical advice, but I just knew that these things made me feel good, but they didn't make me feel good for very long. So I was going to my sessions and I was having some sort of treatment, and I was coming out feeling like I was on top of the world, and within a couple of days it had all slid away from me and I'd lost my my actual feeling of greatness again. And I couldn't afford to do things every couple of days. You know, it was just impossible. I hadn't got the time, but I also hadn't got the finances. So I began to search for ways that were more long term. And I just fell into a pattern of self-study, being curious about why does this work? What's happening? Why doesn't it work? There was lots of things I did that didn't work. But basically, one door closed and another door opened, and I just followed this pathway that in the end took me on such a wild journey. And in that period of time, self-healing, you know, it just was a period where I was healing myself. And when I came to the other side of that, I just knew I had to share what I'd learned.
Wonderful.
That's when the coaching obviously took over.
And I know you do energy work, so I'm sure the question on everybody's minds at this point is, how do you as a scientist marry the energy work that you are doing with what you know on a scientific level?
I suppose energy work really is working with the quantum field. So the dark matter that's around us contains the energy and the information, the data that that we sort of say maybe is our aha moment or our inspiration or an idea that comes from nowhere. So that's all sort of carried in the quantum field. So there is a huge link between the scientific backed evidence that we have and the sort of woo-woo that we've been led to believe comes from the East. And I studied psychology, I studied the mind, I wanted to know why I felt bad, why I felt good. So I studied all of the things that I could do in the West that was the scientific backed evidence. And when I got to the point where the questions I were asking could no longer be answered, then I turned to the East. And that's when I walked into the woo-woo a little bit, but it made sense because I had the science-backed evidence that I'd already learned. And I suppose really I'm just one of those people that has mixed the two together and married the two up. So I teach from this is a fact, although it's called this in the East, we now know why that has worked for thousands of years, because our science tells us that it's working on our a nervous system, it's working on our mindset. And so I can marry the two together.
It's been quite an interesting learning journey for myself also, to uncover how science is almost catching up with things that have been working in other cultures for thousands of years, as you said. And I'm grateful that we're getting to that point where we're able to tie up the strings and find the links between the things. So yeah, it's quite a privilege.
Yes, and let's be honest and say, fads come and go. Diets come and go. We all get the latest summer diet so that we can get back into our summer clothes, and they never last. Why? Because they're not really long-term fixes for the things we need. Humans are not stupid. And when something works, we don't need to have to know the science behind it. We just need to know that it works. And that's very much ingrained into culture. It doesn't matter whether you are in Africa and you have your long association with your African tribes, or whether you're turning to the East and you have a long association with Zen practices or Buddhism. It doesn't matter. What matters is that things that work survive the test of time.
Yes.
When something's been practiced for thousands of years, there is a reason. And the reason is that it works.
Yes. Yeah, very well said. Very well said, Nik. So let's get into your experience, your personal experience of divorce. Will you please share with us your story and your journey to where you are today?
Absolutely. My journey was a very tough journey, and I'm going to tell it raw, but I don't want it to put people off, because what I want to say is I celebrate the me that I am now because of what I experienced. But it was a horrendously difficult journey to transition through at the time that I was going through. So I want to take you back to me saying I'm a girl of science, and I went, I did to a good school, and I studied physics, chemistry, and biology, and that is where my calling always was. But I met a very charismatic guy from a very wealthy family, and we worked together, and working together just introduced a relationship. And I'm going to be honest, looking back and now say that it should have stayed as a business relationship. It should not have gone into personal, but because we worked together a lot, it went into personal time as well. And we ended up getting married, and it was a mismatch. He came from a very powerful and wealthy British family, and they were in business, and I did the wrong thing. I dropped my dreams to support his. So I went into his family business, and I was very good at what we were doing, and we were an amazing partnership. But that's where I say that it should have stayed as a business partnership and not gone into a personal relationship, because actually we'd got nothing in common whatsoever within our personal life. And I started very quickly to have a yearning to go back to my science. There was this vast hole. Didn't matter about the money. It didn't matter about the status. Once I'd experienced all of that, I found how shallow that really was. The yearning inside me was that I wanted to do something that was more science-based. And he couldn't understand that. He just said that I was ungrateful, that we had so much going for us as a couple, that we had this wonderful lifestyle, and he just wouldn't understand that it wasn't enough. And it wasn't about greed. It wasn't about how much money we were making or the lifestyle that we created. It was deeper than that. It was a yearning that he couldn't fulfill. And so after several years of a really difficult marriage and a volatile and vindictive marriage, I decided that I needed to step away. And that's when the narcissist within him reared. And it was an incredibly frightening, scary, and volatile period of my life, trying to get out from a narcissistic relationship, surrounded by in-laws that obviously were on his side, working within his family business, living within his family environment with two very young children. It was the scariest thing that I ever did. And I'm going to say something here which might sound totally ridiculous. But Princess Diana gave me the strength to leave my marriage because she had the strength to walk away from the royal family.
Mm-hmm.
And I just saw her doing that and realized that if she could actually step away from such a powerful family, I could step away as well. So the inspiration that she gave me the courage and strength to actually do it. But the replication that came after was pretty horrendous. I was pretty sure at one stage that he'd taken a hit out on me. I was involved in several car accidents that were really bizarre. The legal system didn't support me because he was the one that had the money. He was the one that was powerful. He was the one with connections.
Mm-hmm.
Every time I went to court to try and protect myself, it was all treated like it was a joke.
Mm-hmm.
The police were unhelpful. He cut the telephone lines. This was way before we had mobile phone connections.
Mm-hmm.
He actually physically cut the telephone lines to my house and then started to do crazy and weird things outside, and I couldn't contact anybody to come. I got 2 young children up in bed. I honestly thought that he was going to sort of like end my life. He threatened to kill the children and refused to retract it. He drove us off the road. I got the children in the back of the car, and he drove us off the road and down an embankment. I could go on and on. He would phone. These are the days when we had landlines, and he would phone at 8 o'clock in the evening and then not put his phone down. So I got no way of disconnecting the call from my end to call for help. And then he would drive to my house and start knocking on the doors and smashing windows.
Yeah.
So scary, totally scary.
Terrifying. Mm.
When I came away from the divorce, I came away with absolutely nothing. He had made sure that I had used everything that I gained in a financial package. I literally passed over to my legal team.
Mm.
So I came away with a very good financial settlement that completely and utterly paid for my legal team during the divorce. Everything that he could do. At one point, we had a high court case. And when I turned up on the first morning, my legal team announced that they couldn't represent me because of conflict of interest.
Yes.
His legal team had asked every firm in the United Kingdom one question about the case.
Which put them in that position.
And I couldn't find any legal representation. And I had to go into a high court hearing with no legal representation because I couldn't find anybody to represent me.
Goodness.
So this was a total and utter wearing down. I lost my complete confidence in the legal system. I didn't believe anything that anybody said was truthful or valuable. And by the time I came out, I had got 0 money. I actually had to go to our local council and move into a refuge flat. So from a multi-million house into a refuge flat with a drug addict on one side and a prostitute on the other. And the only toilet that we had was down the corridor. So I had to make the children or encourage the children to pee in a saucepan because I was frightened to go outside of the door after 8 o'clock at night. I hadn't ever experienced anything like that before. Not judging here, just saying how terrifyingly frightened.
Sure. Nik, that is terrifying. It sounds like you were really victimized.
Yeah. So for 10 years, I got stuck on a record of victim. And that's what I want to really put across to people here that are listening, is that I allowed him to continue to victimize me, even though he wasn't. I allowed him to continue in my head. Every day when I woke up, I would go into that victim mindset of all the things that he'd done and the way that he treated us, and how could he do that to his young family, his 2 sons. And I allowed him for 10 years to control my life, even though he wasn't part of it, or he wasn't even doing anything. The divorce was over, he went on his own way. He moved on. You know, he found another person, he remarried, he continued with his business, he went on his holidays, and for 10 years, I was like a timid little mouse trapped inside my house because I didn't know how to get out of it. And I think if I had to be honest, I don't use the word regret because I don't have them. But if I had to use it, that would be the one thing that I regret. And the one thing that I would say to people is, do not allow somebody else, through your memories, ruin the prospect of your future.
That's very well said, but easier said than done. Hey,
Totally.
Because what you experienced must have been very, very traumatizing, and it takes a lot of work to put all of that behind us, work through it, and really grow to a point where we no longer live with that fear and anxiety and the stress and everything.
But that's the reason why I give in interviews like this, is because that one episode of Princess Diana announcing was the catalyst that got me out of that narcissistic relationship. So one phrase or one sentence that somebody might say on an interview like this can be the catalyst to help somebody go, do you know what, I'm doing that, and I can see there's light at the end of the tunnel, because I can see how confident and how much more together she is now. Because honestly, if you'd have seen me 20 years ago, black eyes, no sleep, timid, scared, frightened to say anything, didn't think I had anything that was worth saying, very much a people pleaser, to keep everybody quiet, so even with family members, got out of my way to do things that even I didn't want to do, because it was easier to be a people pleaser than it was to be a victim. Those are the type of things that you need to watch and see, and then you need to come for help. I didn't go for help. I wasted 10 years because I actually didn't get help.
And that's very, very important first step to take, and something that many of us struggle with, is firstly to admit we need help, but to reach out and ask for it is very hard for most people to do.
Yeah, and I convinced myself that he was still watching, and if I went for help, he would take the children, because he would say, oh, she's mental, she's crazy, or whatever. So I didn't purposely go for help, because I didn't want him to know that I was struggling. How stupid is that?
Yeah.
He probably had, on his lovely holidays, long forgotten that I even existed. But I made myself feel important by thinking that he was still watching, that he was still caring, and that he would do something about it. He wasn't interested. He created a completely new life. So, at the end of the day, some of the things that we tell ourselves, is just really to justify our own fear, our own reasons why we're doing the things we're doing, because change is stressful. Change, there is a lot of resistance to it, but that's why we know we're changing, right? Because there is resistance.
Yeah, and that's where we grow. That's the place where we learn the lessons and integrate them into our adult selves and grow. And that in itself is also scary.
Yes, totally. But one thing that I've learned is that if I feel comfortable, I'm not in growth.
Exactly. Yes.
It is
Exactly.
only in growth that we feel the resistance to the changes that we're making. But obviously, on the other side of the changes, we are definitely a happier person because we have grown into that new space.
So, Nik, tell me, well, first of all, thank you very much for sharing this very personal part of your journey. I'm sure it holds very valuable information and insight for everybody who's going to be watching this interview. You mentioned there was one thing that managed to get you to take the first step to get out of that situation, and that was when you saw Princess Diana do the same thing. What was it that got you out of this narrative, this habit, this hole that you were in, this victimhood, if I may call it that? Was it also one thing that pushed you? Was it something specific that made the difference?
No, it was really strange. It's one of those aha type strange moments. I'd basically lost most of my friends. I'd been on repeat record playing for 10 years. And they were very supportive in the beginning, and they were probably still being supportive after a year. But by the time we got to the 2-year marker, they'd really given up on me because I wasn't fun to be around. I'd go out, I'd have a glass of wine, and as soon as the wine started to relax me, all this aggression and all this sort of like, you know, how could he do this and why is he doing this? And, you know, all came back, and it was just like on repeat. So basically, I'd lost all my friends. I was pretty much alone. I was trying to self-help, so I was doing courses and things like that. And I don't really know what happened, but I just woke up one morning, and it was about 10 years into the journey. And I suddenly had this epiphany, aha moment where I actually thought, he has completely and utterly moved on with his life. He's found somebody else, he's remarried, hasn't had any more children, but you know, he's still working his job, he's still living his life, and I am having these pity parties, and I've got nothing to show for it. I've done 10 years, I've got no friends, I've got no relationship, I've got 2 wonderfully loving sons, but they're now going off on their own and doing their own thing. What is my life? And it was that realization that I might as well have still been in that narcissistic marriage, because in the 10 years, I'd still been in that narcissistic relationship.
Yes.
And I hadn't actually broken free from it. So basically, that was my epiphany moment. And I just literally got up and I thought, you know what? I can't do this anymore. This is not the life that I was meant to have. And so I just started with hobbies. I just made a pledge to myself that I was going to go out and I was going to find some different friends. And I joined hobbies. I joined clubs and associations, and I just did things that made me feel, well, just took my mind off it to start off with. You know, and I promised myself as I was walking out through the door that I was not going to mention anything about a divorce, and I was not going to mention anything about an ex. So if anybody said to me, you know, oh, what's happened in your life, not that they did, but if anybody did say that, I was going to start from walking out through the front door today and the drive to get me there. Because actually, when people ask you, how are you, they don't really mean it.
Yeah. Or listen to what you respond with.
Yeah. I was looking, I don't know whose site it's on, but I was going through my email, people that I've, sorry, not my email, my Instagram followers, and somebody had done a really brilliant, reel, and it was literally on that subject. She literally did the whole of her life from being born in like a 30-second, really fast speech of all the disappointments and everything that she's had. And this person was holding open the door for her in a hotel, you know, and he just sort of said, welcome. And she'd sort of like, and I thought, yeah, that is pretty much true. When somebody asks you how they are, they don't want your life story.
Nik, there's so much in your story that resonates with me, because I had very similar experience myself with my own divorce. And I want to, if you're comfortable with that, maybe just take a moment and talk about what I remember for me was the shock, the disillusionment, because the things that happened were like the things you saw in movies or soap operas. Some of the things that were done were literally unbelievable. I could not believe that a person could do these things to me. I could not believe that a person could behave that way. I was stunned. And I think that put me in a state of shock and almost paralyzed me. So staying stuck in that vigilant state of waiting for the next horrible thing to happen, waiting for the next, I literally want to call it an assault on my life, or the next threat to my existence, kept me in a state of vigilance, and that helped to keep me down, keep me stuck in that victimhood, that fear, that total, I don't know how to explain, was it a disbelief? This is my life, and I can't believe that all these horrible things are happening, and it's coming from the same person that I once was madly in love with, the same person that fathered my children, and it was like everything changed and it just became so horrible. It was all those things contributed to keeping me stuck there. It took a lot of hard work and effort and growth and bravery and courage to break free from that.
I think what I never noticed was the erosion of my personality over a period of time. The person who had gone into the relationship, the person who'd fell in love with my partner, that was not the same person that came out the other end.
Yes.
But like wrinkles on our face that you don't notice from one day to the next appearing, I never noticed the erosion of my personality and character. So it wasn't like a shock for me. It was just a continuation of a dream that was turning darker and going into a nightmare. And I didn't even really analyze it, and I'm an analyzer. I just was trying to cope.
Because it's so overwhelming.
Totally. And I just walked on eggshells the whole of the time. And I just learned to be a people pleaser to him, because it was far much easier for me in my vigilant state to just be that people pleaser. And so I never noticed that I had actually drifted into that state. And it probably wasn't until, I don't know, maybe 6 months after I'd completely come away from him that I actually realized how much of a doormat I'd actually become. But it is about self-preservation. I never experienced an abusive man. I think there were times when he wanted to be, but he wasn't. The worst he ever did, which is pretty bad, was sort of like drag me around by my hair and tell me that the house wasn't clean. We got 2 young children. It wasn't clean to his standards, but, you know, and in order, because I resisted being moved from one room to the next, you know, he grabbed me by the hair and sort of like dragged me from one room to the next to point out the little things that he'd sort of set up that I hadn't noticed and hadn't cleaned. So, you know, he'd put a mark on the door frame, for argument's sake, and a fingerprint on the door frame, and I hadn't cleaned it off in 3 days. And so he was pointing out all the different things that I hadn't done, even though I worked full time with him. But it was, so he wasn't actually a physical abuser. He never forced himself upon me sexually. He never hit me, but I think there were times when he wanted to, but he had control. What he was a mental manipulator. He played games, and you never knew how the game was going to end because it had so many different endings. So you were always walking on eggshells, and I was always trying to sub-guess how this game was going to pan out, because obviously I knew at the end of it I was going to be the victim. And I was trying to steer myself into the best position. You know, I was going to be the sacrifice, and I knew that that I was either going to be, it was either going to be a painful sacrifice or it was going to be a death sacrifice. I'd got to try and manipulate, and I became a game player too. And when you get 2 game players, it's a pretty horrible battleground to actually be in. And so for me, it was the mindset. I just lost my confidence. I lost my sense of who I was. He was very clever at having 2 personas. So we would go out and he would be the ideal role model. In fact, when I went to my friends and I said, I'm going to divorce him, they were all shocked because the image he created outside of the house was the perfect man, always immaculately dressed, well groomed, educated, with money, wealthy, very helpful, polite conversation. You know, we would go out in a taxi, and man would knock on the door, and 2 minutes before the taxi arrived, he'd sort of like physically got me around the throat and was sort of like, you know, growling in my face, and the doorbell would ring and he would open the door and go, "Oh, come on, darling."
Yeah.
And I'd be sitting in the taxi sort of like shaking.
Rattled.
And sort of like, you know, what on earth has just gone on? And it's like it hasn't happened. And he would be absolutely perfect all the way through the evening. You know, would you like anything else? Do you want another glass of wine? All of these perfect behavior. And we would walk into the house and slam the door, and he would be back with his hand round my throat as if we haven't been out.
Sure. Yeah.
And, you know, he was clever. He was manipulative and he was clever. There was one occasion where he grabbed me by my arms at the bottom of the stairs, and he shook me. And when I sort of like lifted up my arm, I'd got clear fingerprint marks. And it's one of the only times that he really ever marked me. And obviously I said, you know, now I've got the proof. Now I'm going to the doctors. Now I'm going to the police, and I'm going to show them what you've done. And he very calmly walked up the stairs, and he got to the top, and then he threw himself down the stairs.
Good grief.
And he got up and he said, "And now I have the proof and the marks to say you pushed me.
Wow. Unbelievable.
And the marks that are on your arms are the marks I created while I was trying to save myself from you pushing me.
Yeah.
How do you mentally,
Mm.
you know, it was just as I said, he was just incredibly narcissistic, but incredibly manipulative, and of course I had real difficulty proving anything, because even my friends all said, but you know, he's a model of a man, he's always perfect, he's a gentleman, he opens the door, he closes the door, he pulls your seat back. What on earth would you want to divorce somebody like that for?
Yeah. And you know, it's absolutely horrendous to know because I've been working with families in divorce for a number of years, that this sort of thing happens in so many households. This sort of relationship is common.
Yes. More common than we choose to believe, yes.
Yes, yeah. Nik, how did this affect your children?
They were very protective of Mom. I've got 2 sons. They were young, so both of them had problems in their while the divorce was going on. So we went back to bedwetting. We went back to childish behaviour. We had a period of time where their schooling was not as good as it could have been. But I was very aware of what they were going through, so I was very protective. And that's really the bartering chip that in the end, he used all the time. Was he knew that the only thing that could really, really hurt me was the children. So he turned his behavior towards them, the promises, the unfulfilled promises. He knew that would hurt me. He knew when they came home and they'd had a dreadful weekend with him, that would hurt me. So he played that game, and he played it well. You know, his weekend to pick them up from school, he promised them that they were going to go here, there, and everywhere, and then he wouldn't turn up and pick them up. And I'd get a phone call from the headmistress to say, you know, nobody's turned up to pick the children up today, and I'd have to go and pick them up. And that wasn't my weekend, so I'd had to cancel everything that I'd planned, try and get hold of him, and it was all a game. He would think it was funny.
Yeah, it sounds so familiar. It's the things people do.
Yeah.
Sure.
Now, has it affected them? Yes, of course. We would be total and utter liars if I sat here and said, you know, no, I've got 2 perfect boys and they are absolutely wonderful. They are now 37 and 35, and they do have their rackets, their insecurities that have been caused. But luckily, because I went on my personal journey and they were still living at home, they were subjected to my belief systems as well, that there is hope and that we can make changes. And so they both have become okay in their adult lives. More than okay. They're both good men. They're both married, which quite surprised me. I did honestly think that maybe at least one of them wouldn't commit to a long-term relationship, but no, they're both married. They both are in good marriages. They're both good men. They've got families and they're good dads. So they seem to have got their lives together pretty okay. But I would honestly say that I can see little underlying currents that I know have come from the divorce.
And don't we all have those things?
Of course we
even
do.
Those of us who don't go through a divorce, we all get wounded and hurt somewhere along the line. So it's a lifelong process to heal ourselves and to grow and become more of what we potentially are. Wow.
Yeah, and I think my biggest happiness about the divorce, as far as my children are concerned, is that I got them out young enough that they never took on the character traits that their father had. So because they were 3 and 5, 4 and 6, that sort of age group, they started to see it, but they hadn't experienced enough of it for it to actually come on as a part of their own personality and character. And I'm really grateful for that they don't have the same character traits, the underlying character traits that he displays.
Yeah. And if you're comfortable to share with us, how is their relationship with their father now, after all these years and everything that's happened?
I'm going to say it's cool. And I'll explain why I say that. They went through a long period where they had nothing to do with him by their own choice. I certainly wasn't ever going to force them to create a relationship with a man that I didn't trust his mindset or his behavior if he didn't get his own way. So there's no way that I was going to allow the children to go into any form of relationship with him that they weren't prepared to take on themselves. So from, I would say, about the ages of 10 through to early 20s, they didn't really have much to do with him at all. And he didn't have much to do with them. There were decisions that needed to be made. I would ask him for permission for universities. I would ask him to contribute. Remember, this is a wealthy man. He never contributed anything.
Sure.
He never contributed towards their education. He never contributed, even when they phoned him and said, Dad, I need a computer for my studies. He never contributed.
Wow.
He never contributed towards their driving lessons. All of these things, if we'd have still been married, all of these things he would have contributed to as parents, right? No, he didn't pay anything above and beyond what he felt their worth was. Sometimes that was $20 a month. Sometimes it was $100 a month. He would choose what he thought they were worth.
Wow.
But having said that, when they got to about 20, 25, that sort of age group, and they're now men and they're in their own relationships and they've got their own life going for them, my youngest son started to have that same sort of yearning that adopted children have, that they feel incomplete because they don't know about their other parent. And so we had quite a few lengthy conversations, and in the end I decided that at that age he is his own man and he's got to do his own stuff. So I searched through all my paperwork and I found a telephone number and I wrote it on a piece of paper and I gave it to him. And by that stage he'd gone through the emotional part and he's sort of like, no, I don't want it, Mom. You know, you keep it. I don't want it. I was just going through and I sort of just put it on his kitchen table and I just said, there's the telephone number, and I left. And apparently it was several months later, but he was drunk with some of his mates and they all decided that, you know, it would be a good idea to phone his dad. And so he had the courage of alcohol, picked up the telephone and had a conversation. I don't really know what the conversation was because he obviously was drunk. So it couldn't have been a particularly good one, but that broke the ice. And I think that it was strained, but they continued to have little telephone conversations backwards and forwards. Now, I've said to you, my ex-husband comes from a wealthy family. And he's not interested in his second son. Second son are spares, they're baggage.
Yeah, sure.
It would have been better if he'd been a girl because the girls are treated differently. But second sons, there's no space for them. So he wasn't interested in his second son. He was interested in his eldest son.
Sure.
That's his heir.
Mm.
Now, William, my eldest, didn't want anything to do with his dad. He was very hurt that when he went to university, he didn't support him.
Mm.
He was very hurt that when he needed a car, he didn't support him. On these occasions, I had said to William that if I phone your dad and ask him, he isn't going to agree because he doesn't like me, right? But if you phone and ask him and tell him why you need a computer or why you need a car, he's going to listen. But he didn't.
Yeah.
So there have been 2 or 3 times in William's life where he's contacted his dad, needed something, and his dad wasn't there for him. So as far as he was concerned, he didn't need his dad in his life. But his dad did a deal with his brother, his younger brother, to bring him back into the fold.
Sure. Okay.
So my
More
youngest,
manipulation.
yeah, my youngest son, for 2 or 3 years, pestered and pestered and pestered. Just phone him, just do this, because the reward, which I don't know what it was, but the reward was for David to deliver William. And after a while, 2 or 3 years maybe, William did decide that maybe he needed to. David was offering a lot of things, you know, a lot of little gifts. You know, if you phone dad, you know, he'll take your children to Disneyland. If you, you know, all of these type of things. So in the end, I think William succumbed and he did phone his dad. So his dad came to both their weddings. They have what I would class as a cool relationship with them. He is in their life, but he isn't part of their life. So they're not phoning him on a weekly basis and saying, hi, Dad, how are you? Do you want to see your grandchildren? Do you want to talk to them on Zoom? They're not doing that. What they're doing is maybe sending a text message on his birthday, wishing him happy Christmas, and perhaps phoning once or twice a year just to say, hey, what's happening? He let them, even in this second retake, where the olive branch was created, he didn't take it. Because if that had been me and I had been disassociated from my sons for 10 or 12 years, and suddenly one of them had reached out, I'd have taken that opportunity.
Yes,
both
jump
hands.
at it.
And he didn't. He was wishy-washy. You know, he phoned them, he didn't phone them. He came and visited, then he missed a couple of visits. You know, he came over for the weddings and then he didn't wish them a happy first anniversary. You know, wishy-washy. When I can be bothered, but when I can't, you don't matter.
Yeah.
And they're old enough to see through that, I think.
Fortunately. Yeah, there doesn't seem like there's any real interest there.
No.
Yeah. The stories of divorce. Nik, I'm so grateful that you come to this conversation and shared your story and your insight and your wisdom. Thank you so much for doing that. I'm curious to learn more about the transformative work that you do and that 12-minute practice that you talked about.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you can leave people with who are on the verge of divorce, who are considering it, weighing their options and unsure of what they should do? Is there any gold nugget of wisdom that you can share?
Yes. Be true to yourself. We have one life on this planet, and regardless of everybody else's opinion, you are the only person living that life. You're the only person feeling that life. We experience our life through feelings. Nobody can feel your life. Only you can do that. So be true to yourself. You know, we all face challenges all the time. And my divorce is probably one of the one's on the worst end of the scale, but there's lots of divorces that are nowhere near as vindictive and as nasty as mine, and they don't have to be. So it doesn't mean that just because I've had a vindictive experience that you are going to have that too. But look inside yourself, sit quietly, and actually ask yourself poignant questions. Is this really what I want? What I want? Not what the children want, or what my mother wants, or what my husband wants, or my wife, whichever sex you are. You know, it isn't about what other people want. It's about what you want. Because there's one sure thing. When you reach the day when you are going to no longer be on this planet, whenever that might be for you, we do not look back and consider all the things that other people have done to us. We look back and consider, what did we achieve? What did we do? And what would we have done differently? And let's make sure that when that is our time, it's all in favor of what served our purpose and not what served everybody else's. And I don't mean being kind. I'm not talking about, you know, gestures of kindness and things like that. I'm talking about that hole that was created in me, that deep yearning hole that was just growing and growing. It was just eating away at me. That was my destiny saying, you're not in the right place here.
Very well said. That's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Nik.
Pleasure.